Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, pleasure to be joined by Anne Ravanona. Anne, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your world and what you do for our worldwide audience. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you so much, Simon. I'm delighted to be here on your fabulous podcast. So I'm Anne Ravanona. I'm founder and CEO of Global Invest Her, and I'm on a mission to help close the funding gap for women entrepreneurs worldwide through access to capital and markets. So that's the one-liner. I'm a global advocate on access to funding and access to markets for women entrepreneurs, and very passionate about that. So that's me in a nutshell, Simon.
Well, look, you've hit the topic straight away because this is a big global problem that you're hitting on here.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of funding that goes to women entrepreneurs, when people start to dig into it and look into it, staggeringly low.
Mm-hmm.
Huge challenge for many women who are trying to grow and scale businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Almost anywhere on the planet, it's a problem.
Yep.
And the work you're doing, you don't do things small, Anne, because I know you're on a mission to get 1 million women entrepreneurs funded by 2030. Tell us all about that.
Oh, absolutely. So I want to build on what you've just said, Simon, about where the mission came from and those statistics that you said. I'm going to give them hard truths behind the words that you've just framed this conversation. So the reason why we want to focus on getting 1 million women entrepreneurs funded is that I truly believe that women are the greatest untapped resource to reignite the global economy. I've been saying this for the past 11 years, and I will continue saying it until I die. What do I mean by that is we are grossly overlooked, underestimated, and underfunded. If we were to fund, and I'm going to give lots of statistics for the global audience to give the context. If we were to fund women entrepreneurs to the same level as we do men, the McKinsey Institute has said that that would add $28 trillion to the global economy and 26% to global GDP. 28 trillion, 26%. So we are missing, the world is missing out economically. That's one aspect. The other, of course, is socially and from an innovation perspective. So socially, when women build businesses, we tend to often do businesses that impact the community in a different way, in a bigger way than a lot of businesses that are founded by all male teams. When they've mixed teams, we do see a lot of the social businesses. But that means that we create more jobs, that we impact the community in a more impactful way. And then when it comes to innovation, well, very simply, Simon, women see different problems and we solve them differently. So the world is missing out. We're all getting super excited about AI. What about our collective intelligence, the women's intelligence that we're not pumping into, not tapping into? So, but the male brain and the female brain, they are wired differently. We think differently, we process information differently, and we find different solutions. The best innovation comes from when we have male and female brains working together, right? That's, again, the research has proven that. So when we are ignoring, and I do use that word, ignoring over 51% of the global population, the whole world is missing out on incredible innovation and probably a lot of great businesses. And you've mentioned a couple of things there on the statistic front. The funding gap today, like it was when I started Global Invest Her in 2013, Simon, the reason I started it was I read a statistic. I have many different reasons why, but as soon as I found a piece of research by the World Bank, IFC, that estimated the global credit gap between male and female entrepreneurs in 2013, it was estimated to be $300 billion. And that made me angry. I said, why is there such a gap in access to credit and access to funding between male and female entrepreneurs just because of gender? That makes no sense whatsoever. And 300 billion was an atrocious number. Fast forward now to pre-COVID, 2019 is the latest statistics we have from the IFC. in 2019, they estimated that global credit gap to be $1.7 trillion. So we are going backwards. We don't have the latest statistics because 2019, what happened 2019-20, COVID. So the pandemic has slowed down all that information gathering. And of course, a lot of businesses died during the pandemic. But the other piece for the global audience to realize is like the World Economic Forum in Davos, they said that it's going to take us 152 years to get to gender equality in the economy. 152 years. Now, given what's happened in the United States, it's going to go back even more, right? It's going to get worse. When I did my TEDx talk in 2015 about access to funding for women entrepreneurs, that statistic was 80 years. It was actually 79. So in less than 10 years, we've gone backwards. We only tripled we have tripled the amount of time it's going to take us to get to gender equality in the economy. It makes no sense whatsoever. And we can sit and cry, or we can take action. And I choose to take action through the different things we do.
Well, thank goodness you choose to take action, because we certainly need people like you, Anne, champion this cause, because the numbers that you're sharing with me here are staggering. And not only were they staggering back in 2013-ish, they've got notably worse by some scale.
Yes.
And look, you mentioned TED, you're no stranger to the TED stage, but I also want to let our audience know that you've spoken on this subject at the United Nations, the European Parliament, the Moroccan Parliament, the W20, which is sort of this official engagement group, isn't it, for policy recommendations to the G20.
Yeah.
So what are the practical steps that you're involved in to try to right this wrong, Anne? Like, what are the actual, building blocks that we need to focus on here? Because this is a fundamental global issue.
Yeah. Thanks for asking, Simon. You hear me sigh because the problem is so enormous. And yet, like when we're talking about systemic change, and that takes generations to fix, unfortunately. The economy has been built by men for men. Okay, so women have been held back for centuries. So we're not going to fix it in 5 years, 20 years. So what I'm choosing to work on, there's a couple of things. It's my work through Global Investor. I'll talk about that in a second. So practical solutions to help women entrepreneurs get funding and find customers. But it's also the policy piece. I think that's very important. I like to work on the policy piece because it's about raising awareness to the powers that be in different instances, because sometimes they with all the best will in the world, they can be very far removed from what's actually happening on the ground. And I'm on the ground and bottom up, trying to give them the news, the information from reality, from what's happening, and to also not just tell them, but to say, here are some practical suggestions. So I would like to kind of talk about the two legs of that table, if you will. And the third one, actually, I would say there are three legs to the stool. One is practical, pragmatic solutions that I'm doing with the company side of things, with my company, the policy shaping. And I call it policy shaping because it's more than just making policy. It's how do we, the third leg, which is all of this sits on it, is also the mind shifting. It's shifting mind, shifting awareness around the topic. So that's the advocacy piece. It's the public speaking piece. And it's also the piece about putting the spotlight on fantastic women founders and their businesses so that they can be seen and funded and get customers. Because a huge part of this is that we do not see enough women entrepreneurs and we don't see the success stories. So therefore, we perpetuate this bias, because unconscious bias, the definition is when you make a decision based on perception, not fact. And so when we keep hearing this unconscious bias, some of it's unconscious for sure in the heads of investors and women founders, but a lot of it is conscious. We know about it and we choose not to change our minds and ways of thinking and making decisions. We're still basing it on perception and not fact. So we need to showcase more women founders to change that paradigm. So my work is really on those three legs of the stool. And let's maybe start with the work that we do at Global Invest Her. So we are working to get to that 1 million. The reason I came up with that target is that there are currently around 17 million women entrepreneurs in the United States, another 17 million in Europe. Already, if we can work with them and get them to work with the millions and millions of other women entrepreneurs across the world, we'll be doing great. So out of those 34 million, if we can get 1 million out of all of those 34 million unlocked and scaling, that can have an enormous rippling effect. And that came from, I had an opportunity to meet President Macron when he was preparing the Generation Equality Forum in Paris in 2019. It got postponed because of COVID. And I met him again in 2020 when he was preparing it. And his team asked me to come with suggestions for economic empowerment. Other people at the table, we were about 11 people, and there were lots working on violence against women and girls and other very important topics when it comes to women. But I was the only one there on the economy. And they said, come with suggestions for France. And of course, I came, Mr. President, with suggestions for France, G7 and G20, because when you have that opportunity, you make most of it. And that's when I said, if I'm meeting, not if, as I'm meeting President Macron, you have to go in with a big, hairy, audacious goal. And that's where the 1 million came from, right? So that's what the impetus was, because I wanted to go in and give my commitment, to consolidate my commitment. It's lovely to have words, but it's actions that are more important. So fast forward, at Global Invest Her for the last, 13 years, we had been, 11 years, we'd been doing a lot on education and awareness building. So helping women entrepreneurs demystify the funding process, how to approach investors, rebuild their confidence, all of that good stuff. And then during COVID, I said, oh my gosh, how can we help all those women who are not being found? So I created what I called then the founder directory. So a global directory of women-owned businesses. There wasn't a global directory of women-owned businesses. There are regional, city, country, our sector, but none global. So I said, let's do a global directory. And it started from there. And I realized that I was trying to figure out what's our positioning. And I understood then during the pandemic, our positioning really is to be connectors and catalysts in this space. So I don't want to be a source of funding. I don't want to create a fund. I want to connect. I want to be the connector between fabulous founders and the funders. And funders are, it can be anything from banks, accelerators, corporates, as well as investors, right? So I use a wider term. So we help women entrepreneurs through different ways. One is through our global community, and we have new things coming out very soon that you'll hear about soon, where we will have a deal flow directory of curated deals of women-owned businesses for investors to find. And also, we currently already have the funding menu. So I created a global directory of sources of funding that are women founder friendly. So we rank the sources to say, actually, out of 5, have they done this, 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 and this, right? So the women can actually go to their investor research and their funder research faster. So on the one hand, I want to create practical, scalable tools so that we can impact more women, right? Because to get to 1 million, you have to do something that's scalable. So through the community and the directories that we have in service of that community, that's one part. The other part, so that's more on the access to funding. It's like connecting founders and funders through the deal flow directory and through the funding menu. That's one part. The second part is buy from her, because the best form of funding is a paying customer or a user. And so what if we can actually switch that on fast to say, let's start buying from women. So it is, again, a global marketplace that we are creating. It's literally launching this week. So whenever this goes live, you will hear it, and it's already up. But we are creating a movement around this, more than just a marketplace, Simon. It's a movement so that people start to be more conscious in their purchases and start actually seeking out and buying from women. Most people don't know that Canva is a woman, Eventbrite is a woman CEO, that Swell bottles are women. There's so many examples, but the women are hidden. And so on our directory, you can go find them, search by products, services, sectors, and you also learn about the founder, the woman founder behind it. So buy from her is a rallying movement, a call to action to say we can actually change things We can create more economic prosperity for women and create more generational wealth if we give them more customers, if we actually start using the power of our purse. So that's buy from her. They're the two big pieces. And the third part of what we do at Global Invest Her is through our Invest Her Summit. So we basically have an annual gathering where we bring together the policy shapers, women entrepreneurs, investors, and corporates who care, all to talk and to take action around funding women. So we've had two summits, one in Dublin and one in Paris. Our next one would most likely be in Paris again in 2026. So the next coming year, we'll talk about that soon. We'll be focusing on other things. So Global Invest Her is really tools, practical, pragmatic tools to connect the founders to the funders and to connect the ecosystem, the policy shapers, bring them in through the summit and through other work that we do. Then I come back to the advocacy piece. You mentioned the W20. I'm very honored to be part of the EU delegation of the W20, which is an official engagement group to G20, where we make policy recommendations to the G20 leaders on what they can do to help more women and girls. And I specifically work on women's entrepreneurship and access to finance. And so there, it's about being very pragmatic and practical. So it's saying, here are some practical suggestions, the powers that be in the G20 of what you can do. So we put forward, every year we work together collectively, the W20 women, we work on a communique, and we've just released the communique recently that was handed over to President Lula, because G20 was Brazil who was ahead of it this year. So it was recently, literally last week, handed over to President Lula. And so in our recommendations, we make recommendations with regards to tax, access to collateral, other types of incentives, educational, like financial literacy, educational, entrepreneurial literacy and training programs from early on. So we actually have some very concrete recommendations in our communique, and I'll be happy to share the link for the show notes as well, so people can see what it is we collectively are putting forward. And what's different this year is that we also are working on the action plan to kind of say, here are actual case studies of what's worked in other countries. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, Mr. Leaders and Mrs. Leaders, very few Mrs., but Mr. Leaders of the G20, here are some pragmatic examples of what works in other countries that you can be inspired by. So that's on the policy. It's really the work that I do is through the W20 mainly, but also yeah, it's really there, and also through the work that I do by convening policy shapers during my summit, during Invest Her Summit, and through meetings that we organize there. So that's the policy piece. And the last leg of the stool that I mentioned was advocacy. And advocacy is about shining the light and giving a voice to the women entrepreneurs, letting them speak up for themselves, showing them. And so we do it through many ways. I do that through public speaking. I speak at many conferences around the world on this topic. Also, I am a mentor / advisor / thought leader at different organizations. So the Cartier Red Box Me community, so I'm a mentor in that. I'm a nominator for the Earthshot Prize, and I'm so proud because the Earthshot Prize is the prize by Prince William to support like 15 fantastic entrepreneurs around the world working on the sustainable development goals for the planet. And last year I put forward a certain number of entries, all women, and one of my nominees made it to the finalists. She's in the top 15 finalists in the world, which was phenomenal. I'm so proud of her. So this is what it's about. It's like giving women a platform and giving them access to opportunities and visibility. So that I do through those avenues, and really also showcasing the women from our platform. We have our own podcast, Invest Her podcast, and in our newsletter. So we're always trying to put the spotlight on the funds investing in women, the corporates doing programs, and we partner with corporates such as Dell, EY, AXA, and other big corporates in their programs where they help women entrepreneurs. So I've gone on a little bit, Simon, but those are the three parts of the stool of my work, and that's what I do every day.
And look, you're obviously passionate about it, and why not? And you certainly have chosen a big, audacious goal. There's a lot to focus on there. And there are two words, though, that I think helped summarize that you used earlier on: connectors and catalysts.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of encompasses everything that you're doing. And I would encourage people to go and check out the different strands. Like you talked about See Her, which is
Mhm.
this global directory of women-led, founded type businesses.
Mhm.
You talked about Fund Her, which
Mhm.
is about deal flow and, raising finance and
Mhm.
growing and scaling your business. But you also talked about another important one, which is often overlooked, which is, as you termed it, buy from her,
Mhm.
which is also important in terms of buying from women-led businesses. And it reminded me as you were talking, when I think about male versus females at the boardroom level, when I think about the FTSE 250, when I think about the S&P 500,
Mhm.
it's kind of it's got a little bit better, but nowhere near where it should be. And you were talking earlier about the great benefit and this untapped potential. And you were talking about the gap is in the trillions now. Like
Yeah.
it's when you put it into that context, it's pretty scary on one hand, but it's also a phenomenal global opportunity in
And
another.
it really is. Exactly, Simon. And I want, just in the UK context, like when the Rhodes Review came out in 2019, they discovered that if we invested in more women entrepreneurs, it would add £200 billion to the UK economy. All right. So, and that's super important. I've just finished a very big piece of work for Dell, which is the Dell funding blueprint, where we literally, I analyze for the City of London, that Dell do the We Cities report, a global report on the best cities in the world for women entrepreneurs. And I'm doing 9 funding blueprints. I convinced them to do funding blueprints for 9 cities. I've just finished the London one. I've done the first 5. And London is #1 in the world when it comes in the Dell study for women entrepreneurs, and they're #3 on capital. And it was fascinating to me when I actually studied from a meta-analysis of the things that the government has been doing over many years, the ecosystem, this entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's so many facets that make it work. That piece of work is really fundamental, because when we see what they did right, it can be a blueprint for other governments and for other countries around the world. Silicon Valley and New York are still ahead when it comes to funding for women entrepreneurs, but that's also because the biggest money in the world is currently in the United States. So the pot of money is bigger. So it's normal that London is #1 in Europe when it comes to funding, right? Any entrepreneurs, not just women entrepreneurs. So you talked about the opportunity. When we hear the trillions and all of these things, I look at it as the opportunity, not an opportunity cost, but it's an opportunity loss that we are missing out because we are not funding more women, not because they're women. I'm not saying give us special treatment. It's never about that. It is about at least give us the same access to opportunity, because we're not even getting invited to pitch. When we pitch, we're not getting to the investment committees. The people making the decision in the investment committees are mostly men. And to wrap it in a bow, only 2% of venture capital worldwide last year went to women-owned businesses, about 18% to mixed teams. That hasn't changed in 20-something years since we started counting, right? Very little. I think with the maximum we went up to was 2.3 a few years ago. 1% of government procurement and 1% of corporate procurement worldwide goes to women-owned businesses. The mind boggles. It's like, why? Why? So it's a systemic problem across the world. But what gives me hope, Simon, is now we have the data. 11 years ago when I started, there was very little data. Now we have the McKinsey, the Boston Consulting Groups, the Wharton, and other people coming out with solid data that we can now quote. And you mentioned women on boards, like not having enough women on boards at public companies, and also not just at the main board, but also at the executive committee level. And what works and what we've seen working in other countries are the quotas or targets, right? And so when a government puts in place a quota, it actually helps to change things, because you have to reach that target by a certain date, or else there are usually financial repercussions. And that worked, for example, for France. Before we put in place the quota to have 40% women on boards, there were only 7% women on boards of public companies. And now they're over 40%, and we got there much faster because the government put in place a quota. They've gone further in the last couple of years to extend that to 30% women on executive committees of public companies. So where there's a will, there's a way, Simon. And there are examples around the world of where this has worked. And when we see the UK ecosystem thriving and the women's entrepreneurial ecosystem thriving, it's also because it's multiple players and stakeholders in the system are playing the game and are starting to change things, because it's not one factor, it's multi-factor. And that's why this problem is so complex.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, I think California also implemented a similar rule with differing results, you know, some good, some bad. And France, I'm less familiar with than I am sort of with the Californian law, which is quite a number of years old now
Well,
at
they
this
have a
stage.
new one, but there's this new California bill that came out, I think it's only 2 years ago, which is slightly different. It's not to do with quotas on boards. It's regarding transparency of where venture capitalists invest. So they now have to, by law in California, they have to transparently say what percentage of their funding is going to women entrepreneurs. And I know Alison Byers from Scroobius, she's one of the women who helped pass that bill. She was one of our speakers at Investor Summit. Immense work. And she's now currently working for Massachusetts to bring in the same bill. So there are laws and then there are bills, because the United States federal and state and so on level. But that's a major thing, that now in California, the land of Silicon Valley, that VCs are now having to, by law, transparently show what they're doing. And there are other examples around the world, because your podcast is global, Simon. In Australia, there is a really good initiative as well. And I think I'm going to get it wrong. They're going to kill me. But it's called equity something. I'll find it and send it to you. But Australia also have basically a couple of funds, 5 funds in Australia said this is enough. And they decided they came together and say, we're going to be transparent. We're going to put a table on our website saying how many women pitched to us, how many women made it to the investment committee, how many women got funded, and we're putting that transparently on our website. And I'm like, hallelujah, that is fabulous. So there are examples of these things happening in other cities and other parts of the world. So, there is a tidal wave coming slowly but surely. It's not yet a tsunami, but there are changes in the world that are happening. It's getting better. It's getting better over the past 10 years. We're really not there yet, but it is getting better.
Well, that's good news to hear. And I'm very conscious that we're talking as well with very large numbers. We're talking in a global context, but I also want to bring it back to real tangible learnings as well. And you mentioned your own podcast, and I know you're no stranger to that side of the microphone too. But I think what's fascinating is on your podcast, the Invest Her podcast, you talk about these funding stories, don't you? You talk about these insights. You touch on these practical tips,
Yeah.
and you have um, an eclectic mix of people that are coming at that sort of problem from various sides. Could you unpack that a little bit for our audience who may want to find out some of those sort of, I'm going to call them in inverted commas, real life stories about
Yeah.
the trials and tribulations, you know?
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning it, Simon. So it is a very eclectic mix. We have currently about 50 episodes. There's another 10 or 15 in the box to come out soon. So what we like to do is give the voice to women entrepreneurs to share their real funding journeys and the voice to investors to share about themselves, their fund, what they invest in, to demystify this, to show them as real people. And to your point, to give practical tips to the audience, whether you're a founder or a funder, and insight so that people can say, oh, I didn't realize this was like that. So it's very eclectic. We have speakers from all around the world, from different stages from the funding journey, from really bootstrapped women to women who are scaling to women who have sold their companies and become VCs themselves. It's fascinating and I love it. My objective with the podcast is to give them the mic. I want them to tell in their own story what it was really like for them to raise their money and the trials and tribulations, what they learned, so other people can learn and they can see that there is no linear path to this. It tends to be more linear for men because they have different networks, because the pitch process has been made by men for men. It doesn't work for women, the 10-minute pitch, because we think differently and we process differently and we communicate differently. So that works for men who think in a tunnel way. It doesn't work for women who think in a web way, right? So we have a fascinating course on that in our community that people can access. So, but the people who are on the podcast are all, I like to showcase the funds, the VC funds, the angel networks who are serious about funding women. So they're the ones who are out there actually walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And I like having the women founders share their real stories and real tips. So you will get real life stories. You get lots of tips and insights from all of them. And in the show notes of everyone, you get more information where to contact them and any research that they mentioned, etc. So it's a great resource. And we want to, encourage more people to go there, but also to contact me. If you want to be a guest, there is a form on the podcast website to say, suggest a guest, suggest yourself if you want. But, it's showcasing those real stories is how we make a difference as well and say, okay. And some of them were recorded during COVID. And it's interesting to listen back to them because then we were talking about strategizing, like, how do you fundraise during COVID? How do you network with investors during COVID? So that was super interesting because some of those tips and tools are still valid today.
Oh, absolutely, they are. And I particularly like the fact that on one hand, you've got somebody raising money. On the other hand, you've got a VC coming to the table to talk about how what they look for example. And it you coined the exact term, demystifies a lot of that. It brings those two parties together, which I particularly like. I want to ask you about the next 12 months. I want to ask you about the year ahead or possibly further. Now, I know you mentioned an Invest Her Summit coming up in 2026, I think. So you're going to be planning for that at some stage in the next year. But what are you thinking about? What's on your radar? What are you hoping to achieve over the next year or so, Anne?
It's very clear for me, Simon, over this next year, I want our community to explode in the sense that we have many, many members who join us, because within there's the deal flow directory and the funding menu. So I want to be able to build, my mission is to build the best database of deals, of women founders deals that in the world. That's what I want to build with the deal flow directory, because it's highly curated. It's not just pay to play. The women don't just apply, pay and get on. They apply, get assessed, and then if they are okay, they pay and get part of it. The same happens with Buy From Her. So we're very much into highly curated experiences. So this year, 2025 is focusing on the global investor community, continue to bring together virtually and through city meetups and local meetups, investors, policy shapers, women entrepreneurs in that community and in that space where they can connect and learn from each other and with each other. So within the community, there will be different memberships that you'll discover very soon, right? So I won't say more about that, but 2025 is really about the community, that deal flow directory and the funding menu, having them really grow. But what's important about that, Simon, is to do it collectively. It's not just Global Investor finding all these women. I want to connect the dots with our networks all around the world so that, accelerator programs to say, oh, brilliant. I want all my cohort to be in the deal flow directory, or I want them to be doing their investor research with you. I want all the investors we talk to and who are serious about funding women to be on the funding menu. It's free for them to be on. Afterwards, if they want to search it, that's a different model, but it's free to them to be visible. So if you are an investor listening and watching Simon's podcast, and you want to be featured, go check out globalinvesther.com on the Fund Her section and you'll find out how. So next year is about really building that, consolidating it, and consolidating Buy From Her. We're starting to build out this movement, and it's a movement that is going to be running in parallel from now on. And so with Buy From Her, with that marketplace, I want to build the best, like an Amazon of women entrepreneurs. I'm not as pretentious to say I'm going to be as big as Amazon, but that's the idea. It's like, what if you could go, and when you're buying your products, you can go and know that it's a woman-owned business and that you're going to support her business by buying from her. And when I say buy from her, the work we'll be doing, Simon, is not only getting fabulous women featured on it and customers buying from it, like already as we launch in the coming weeks, we are giving ourselves collective targets. So we want to, between now and Christmas, and if you listen to this afterwards, hopefully we'll have made this objective. We want the women who are on Buy From Her to collectively have made $500,000 in sales between now and the end of December. It's giving ourselves a target to say, it's not about I'm on Buy From Her marketplace, thank you very much, bye-bye. It's like, no, how much did you sell because you were on that? And then our model, the way we think, Brian, is that the founder pays an annual subscription of $199 to get featured on the directory. We do not take any commission off her sales. She gets all the sales. I want her to get the sales. Okay, that's important. And throughout the year, whether she's a product or a service, B2B or B2C, when she's got promotions, it can be Black Friday, Christmas, holiday season, Mother's Day, summer sale, winter sale, whatever, or just a commercial offer that you have, that founder can update her profile, put her offers on it throughout the year. So it's a no-brainer. We want this to be a sales channel, a new sales channel for fantastic women founders to be found, but to co-create it. So through all the networks saying, I need to be on this, I need to be on it. But then the whole point of Buy From Her is, yes, customers buy from her, corporates buy from her, governments can find her and potentially buy from her. But also women can buy from each other. Buy From Her goes to the women in the directory too. So when they need a product or service for their own business, they can buy from each other. That's the power of Buy From Her. And to have that ripple effect and to connect the dots with other marketplaces out there and really raise awareness. So that's what I'm focusing on, and we're focusing on at Global Invest Her, is building our community with the offering, with the deal flow, with the funding menu. That's going to be fantastic. Buy From Her, really launching the movement, and throughout the year, supporting women, giving them visibility. And then, of course, you mentioned rightly, preparing Invest Her Summit, because that takes the guts of a year to get it ready. And we might have some mini summits during 2025, but we want to come back with a big one in 2026. Give yourself a bit of a breather to focus on these other things, to really whip it up and get to another stage.
It sounds extremely exciting. And I wanted to ask you two quick questions to finish off here, Anne.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, is there anything else you want to share with our worldwide audience? That could be something we spoke about already, or just some parting thoughts. And secondly, and really importantly, because we've covered such a lot here today, if people want to reach out and connect with you or find out more, where's the best place to point people to?
Perfect. Let me start with that one, Simon. I would say the best place is either on my LinkedIn. Go to find Anne Ravanona on LinkedIn, or Global Invest Her on LinkedIn. And then, of course, our website. Go to globalinvesther.com, because you have links to everything that I've described and all the different things we do, okay, including the advocacy. So that's the best place to find. And my parting message to the audience is the same one that I would give when I was speaking at the United Nations. I was introducing the idea of Buy From Her then, and the words I used were, together we can. Can meaning commit to act now. That means that every time we're making a decision moving forward, before I buy something, just double take, even start to search, even do a Google search. Who's the founder? Is it a woman founder or co-founder? She could be a co-founder. I'm happy, no problem. It's not only women, only teams. But be conscious, commit to act now, whether it's you're going to think before you buy and buy more consciously from women-owned businesses, because you can reignite the global economy doing that. And also because the reality is less than 2% of women businesses make it 1 million in sales. Or it's ridiculous. We're always stuck in these things. People don't realize it, and we're holding all ourselves back. It's lopsided, our economy. And then the other thing is then, of course, if you're an investor or a wannabe investor, a future angel investor, invest in her. And that means, very practically, Simon, if you're not seeing enough women founders, start looking for them. Start going to more events where they are present. Start asking your other people in your network, even all the guys, what's the best deals you've seen from women founders in the sector? Any other deals I should talk about and know about? So practically, it's start looking, start counting the number of women founders who pitch to you, start tracking the percentage of deals, women-owned deals, make it to your investment committee and the percentage that get funded, and start questioning and say, if it's super, super low, why is it low? What's in your own process or your thought process or internal process that could be biased and could be fixed? And I'm not pointing fingers. It's like, how can we fix a systemic issue? This is not pointing at anybody. It's like, we can make it better. We can make it better because we're all missing out. Because investors invest in companies because they want to have a return on investment. And the research shows that women-owned businesses have a 35% higher return on investment, a 12% higher return on revenue than male-owned businesses. So what are we waiting for? You make more money when you invest in women. So give us a chance. Just give us a chance of access to the opportunity. There you go. It's a bit more than one. So it's together we can. Commit to act now. Whether you're a consumer, be a conscious consumer and say, who's behind this product? If it's a woman, yeah, I'm happy. And if you've bought from a woman, I want you to tag yourself, put that photo, tag it buyfromher.global, because that's our Insta account, and we will showcase you and say, yes, we will celebrate you because this is the movement and the revolution that we're doing.
Well, thank you, Anne. That brings us nicely to the end of our episode. It's a great note to end on for this episode of the Global Discussion. I want to thank our audience around the world for watching or listening to this episode. I want to ask them to share it, to follow us, to like, to subscribe, to everything we need you to do to help support the show. Go and check out all the phenomenal work that Anne and the team over at Global Investor are involved in. I certainly recommend you do that. And I hope that you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Anne. But Anne, thank you for being on the show. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again today.
Thank you, Simon, for the opportunity.